Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and pray. Let's have Caleb go ahead and open us up in prayer. Amen. So the study's been quite interesting, uh, even though we're going over things that are familiar. They uh, you're getting a little bit more detail out of it. So let's look at the first question here, and then we're looking at part 3. All right, part 3, 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 through 4. We'll go ahead and read those, and then we'll answer our question. And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, shew thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went and shewed himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of the house. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. For it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And we'll go ahead and read verse 5. And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go unto the land, unto all fountains of water, and unto the brooks, peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we lose not all the beasts. So as we remember in the last couple of studies, Elijah put forth a prophecy, and he prayed, and he said it's not going to rain for 3.5 years. Then after he made that prophecy, we saw him go to the woman there and feed her and her son, and then the meal and the oil, the cruse of oil that didn't run out until it started to rain. And then he also healed the kid after that. And now here we are next with Ahab. We're still in our 3.5 years of drought. And okay, let's answer that question real quick. Why are we in that 3.5 years of drought? Does anybody know that answer? Because of idolatry, yes. So I want you to think of that and translate that into your life. Sometimes we may crowd our lives with so much stuff that we may end up having a spiritual drought. Not because we're really technically doing anything wrong, but it's just we have a spiritual famine in ourselves because we're not giving just due to our studies that we should. So with that, we have the rain. So we have the rain because of the idolatry, and the idolatry is leading us here. And it's leading us up to this battle on Mount Carmel here, which is going to be our next study for next week. But so let's go ahead and look at this question here. It says, what was Ahab's primary concern? Yeah, but he wasn't even worried about his people. He was worried about the horses and mules. He didn't say, find some water so we can make some meal and feed our people. No, he was worried about the cattle. That's all he was worried about. Except material things. He had no concern for his own country and own people. And we've seen that over and over again with Ahab and a lot of his decisions that he's made. So what does this say about us? We should. And as we look through this study, we can compare ourselves in each point. But oftentimes, how do we fall prey into acting and feeling like Ahab so much, right? We slip quite a bit. And, we're not as bad as Ahab, but we exemplify some of the things that Ahab has done. Okay, so what do we learn about Obadiah in verses 16 through 6? So let's go ahead and read that one. So let's start off with verse 6. So we know that Obadiah, he hid a bunch of the prophets because he feared the Lord more than he feared the king. And so verse 6 says, so Obadiah hid them by 50s, and put them into caves. And so verse 6 says, so they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. So what they were doing is Ahab and Obadiah, they got together, and they were going throughout the land. They split up. They were going throughout the land to find water and grass for their cattle. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face, and said, art thou that my lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go, tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, what have I sinned, that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? Don't you find that to be quite an odd statement? I mean, Obadiah is serving as king like he's supposed to. You know, we're supposed to, even unsaved people, unsaved bosses, we're supposed to serve them just like we would if we were to serve a saved boss. It shouldn't be no different because we're honoring God, not them. But Obadiah says, why are you coming to kill me? What have I done? Doesn't that seem like a little bit of a guilty trip? Like he did something wrong? Doesn't that make you wonder what Obadiah was thinking? So let's see. So, and he answered him, I am. Go, tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, what have I sinned that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom, rather my Lord hath not sent to seek thee. And when thou said, he is not there, he took an oath of the kingdom and nation, and thou found thee not. And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that thy spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me, but I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth. Was it not told, my Lord, that I did what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord? How I hid the 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them bread and water. Mind you, that's also bread and water from the king's table too, so that's pretty important to note there. Because if you stole from the king, that was your head. So Obadiah really stepped out on faith to help the men of God. And now thou sayest, go, tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay thee. And Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely shew myself unto him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. So again, what was Obadiah's, what was his gripe? What was his concern at this point? Yeah, that's a great analogy there. And the one thing that Obadiah was doing the right thing, but I think he had a little bit of guilt because he felt like he was doing wrong. So when Elijah showed up to see him and to meet with him, his biggest fear is like, yeah, you're going to tell me that you're here, and then I'm going to go tell my king that you're here, and then the Lord's going to call you away to go do something else. And then here I am standing here with the king, and pulled the king away, and now you're putting my life in his hands because you're not going to be here. No, I'll be here. You go tell the king I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here. That was Obadiah was fearing for his own life, just like George had mentioned. He was fearing more. He was talking more in the flesh than he was in the spirit. But it's still interesting to note, though, he was afraid that Elijah, or he was afraid that Elijah was going to leave him, and, kind of set him up for failure. King says he's here, and he's not, and the king's going to behead him because you lied to me. But yet he didn't worry about getting the king's food and water to the prophets. Does that seem kind of weird? I mean, kind of a little backwards to me, I suppose. If you had enough spirit, enough moxie to take from the king's table to feed the prophets, I don't think, when Elijah showed up, you shouldn't be worried too much about Elijah either. So it says, and Ahab blamed Elijah for the trouble that he brought on himself. Of course, Elijah got blamed for everything during that time because it was Elijah's fault that, the whole country slipped into idolatry. He's not the leader of the country. So let's look at chapter 17 real quick, verses 21 through 19 through 21. So we're going to go back here a little bit, and we're going to see some things here that Elijah set up for us. So the blame game is as old as the Garden of Eden. We know that. Adam blamed the woman, and the woman blamed the serpent when they fell into sin there. So let's look at 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 19 through 21. So 19 says, and he said unto her, give me thy son. And he took him out of her bosom and carried him up into a loft where he abode and laid him upon his own bed. And he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourn by slaying her son? And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried unto the Lord. And he said, O Lord my God, I pray thee, let this child's soul come into him again. And you even see there that Elijah was even blaming God for the loss of this child. You see that there in verse 20? It says, and he cried unto the Lord and said, O Lord my God, hast thou also brought evil upon the widow with whom I sojourned by slaying her son? So Elijah's blaming God, just like Ahab is blaming Elijah for the way that Israel is set up, or the idolatry that Israel has there. And and how often do we do that to ourselves too? Blame somebody else or blame something else. It's not my fault that my car died because I didn't put oil in it. That's not my fault. It's not my fault that it quit running because I didn't put gas in it. It's not my, it's somebody else's fault. It's not my fault here, there, anywhere. You can pick something, and I'm sure that we all can think of stories even right now or situations that we were in that we know that it was our fault, but we tried to blame somebody else. That old phrase when you go to school, the dog ate my test, the dog ate my homework. Who used that one? Come on. Who used it? Nick? Yeah, I know you said you did it, but I don't know if it was a lie or not. Oh, well, so your dog ate your iPad? That's not, it's not healthy at all. But, we've used these lies constantly. We hear them constantly where we play that blame game. And we really have to settle on whose fault is it? Raise your hand. Confession's good for the soul. Whose fault is it? So it's just my fault that it's your guys' problem? You're not helping. Rises and falls on leadership, right? So the next question. Oh, is that what it was? Think of pastors. Yeah, we won't go there. Never mind. Thinking of one of pastor's jokes there. I just don't want to make you feel like an idiot. Okay, so a question. So was Elijah in the minority or the majority in this situation? So what do you think? Was he in the minority or was he in the majority in this situation? When you are walking in the Spirit, you are always, always, always in the majority. always you plus God equals the majority. It doesn't matter if there's 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, several million. You and God are the majority. And we so often lose that sight. And a lot of times we tend to try to humanize God's powers. And we try to think that, we try to think like God, and we put God in, a human box, thinking, he doesn't have the power that he has, or he doesn't think like we do, or he's not going to move on our schedule. However, God has his own schedule and his own timeline, and if we just wait on him, you'll always be in the majority. So look with me verses 23 through 24 here. 1 Kings chapter 18. So 23 says, "Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let him choose 1 bullock for themselves, and get it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, and put no fire under, and I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on the wood, and put on the fire." So now we have moved from, so Elijah met with Ahab, okay, and Elijah said, let's have a little bet, maybe. We can put it that way. Go ahead and get all your prophets, right? Get all your prophets, meet me up on Mount Carmel, and let's settle this and find out which one is the true God. And he said, we're going to make this sacrifice, and go ahead and have all your guys go first and do your whole sacrifice there, and set it up. And if your God calls down fire upon your sacrifice, well then, that's your God. But if mine, let the Lord be Jehovah, right? So they go up on Mount Carmel. He sets up the altar, or the prophets of Baal, they set up the altar, and then they begin their ritual. And I always, listening to other preachers talk about this scenario, it's always quite hilarious how they try to animate what they're doing. But I mean, if you think about it, if you just think of we've all watched more TV than what we should, but you've seen rituals like this. You've heard of rituals like this. You've seen them in magazines and things. Just think of, the Indians and other cultures where they gather a bunch of people around, they dance around the fire, and they do a whole bunch of stuff and chant and a bunch of music and drums and all that thing. Well, that's what's going on here. That's what they're doing here. And they did this for 9 hours. They started in the morning, and they went up until right before the actual evening sacrifice, when it should be, or when it should have done. That's when Elijah does his sacrifice. So he said, okay, we're going to meet up at Mount Carmel. You guys go ahead and you take your bullock, you cut it up, and you do your thing, and you get your sacrifice ready, and you go ahead and prepare your sacrifice, and you just go ahead and do it. And I always find it comical, because Elijah taunted him. He's like, hey, scream a little louder. Maybe your God is sleeping. Maybe he's asleep right now. Maybe he's doing something else. And Elijah just sits there and taunts them for 9 hours. That'd be me. I would be that one that would be taunting them or provoking them. I know that very well. And so for 9 hours, nothing happens. Nothing happens. So Elijah says, all right, let's go ahead and set up my sacrifice this time. Now, mind you, when Elijah starts his preparation and starts to set up the altar and rebuild the altar, because, they haven't used the altar in a very long time. So he had to rebuild the altar to God's specs, like God said, this is how the altar's supposed to be. And then he cuts up the bullock just as God said to do it in Leviticus. This is how you do it. You make these cuts here, you put this stuff here, put all the guts over here, put all the fat over here, put all the meat right here, and he separates it out and does everything like God said to do. And he's preparing it for the time at the evening sacrifice, which should be done on a regular basis, but it hasn't been because they've been in idolatry. So verse 24 says, and call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. And Elijah said unto the prophets of Baal, choose you one bullock for yourself, and dress it first, for ye are many, and call on the name of the Lord gods, and gods being there plural, little gods there, verse 25, but put no fire under it. And they took the bullock which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made, and it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry louder, for he is a god. Either he's talking, he's answering prayers, or he's doing something else, or he is pursuing, doing something else, or he is in a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awakened. Aren't you so glad you don't have to wake God? Right? Or you don't have to search for God, or you don't have to beg God. God's right there all the time, anytime, when you want him, when you need him. And they cried aloud, and they cut themselves after their manner with the knives and lances, till the blood gushed out upon them. So they've even went so far as to make their sacrifice. Now they're getting into some serious nasty stuff where they're cutting their arms and legs. And you've got 450 prophets that are bloody. I mean, they're just a mess. The scene is quite horrific if you think about it. And it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice, nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. And Elijah said unto all the people, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. Isn't that what we have to do sometimes too? We have to be able to repair our altar from time to time. Get right with God, purge our house, our soul, our sins, things like that. And Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, unto all the word that the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be thy name. And with the stones he built an altar, and in the name of the Lord. And he made the trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. That's a big trench. And he put the wood in order, and cut the bullock in pieces, and made him the wood, and said, fill 4 barrels with water, and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. I want you to think about this for a second. We just had, rain the last couple of days. Do you think you'd have been able to start a fire shortly thereafter that rain? No, it would be a chore if you didn't have some fire starters or some dry stuff. And it would take a lot to keep that fire going until it dried everything out. And that's what Elijah was going here, was for the dramatic effect. Because, think about it. We're now dumping 4 barrels. Now, when we're thinking about these barrels, I've looked them up, and they're not like big 55-gallon drums that we would kind of think of a barrel to be. They were a lot smaller. You got to remember, they're about the size for 2 people to carry. So, 4 barrels, I would say somewhere in the realm of maybe about 30, 40 gallons of water. Okay? About 30, 40 gallons of water was dumped on the whole sacrifice, into the trench, on the wood. And that's why he built such a berm around the altar that held all that water in there. During a drought, mind you. And everything was completely soaked. But what happens? And he said, do it a second time. And did it a second time. And then he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran round about the altar, and he filled the trench also with water, about 40, 50 gallons worth of water there. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near and said, Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known this day that thou art God in Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at thy words. So the beginning of his prayer, he says, I did everything you told me to do. So I want you to think about that for a second. God told him to put the water in there during the drought. God told him to prepare the sacrifice, but we know that, even us now, we could prepare the sacrifice because we have the instructions here in Leviticus. So God did that. He says, hear me, O Lord, hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that thou art the Lord God, that thou thou hast turned their heart back again. Just that simple little prayer. God, I did everything you told me to do. Now prove it. Prove you are the real God. That's exactly what those two verses said right there. I did what you told me to do. Now you basically, he's saying, okay, I did what you told me to do. Now you hold up your end of the bargain. At verse 38, and the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is the God. Think about how hot that is. Has anybody ever seen stone melt before? I mean, if you've seen lava, you've seen some stone melt. We've seen the circulation of it and how hot volcanoes can get. Okay, this is even hotter than volcanoes. And I've seen some reports of being up to 2,400 degrees. And depending on which stone it was, it'd have to be hotter than that. But this is the all-consuming fire of the Lord, which is probably the same fire that came down and the pillar of fire by night when they were crossing the Red Sea. It was probably the same fire there, and the same fire that led them for 40 years through the desert. So it wasn't nothing new to Elijah because he knew the stories, but everybody else, of course, we've been a couple different generations removed from when Joshua went throughout the land to take it. So we got one last question here, a couple last questions. How did Elijah get God's attention then? And what was Elijah's primary concern? So now we looked at Ahab's concern. We look at Obadiah's concern. What was Elijah's concern? What did he do to get God's attention? We've already talked about that in the last couple of verses. What did we say? Yep, that was it. No. Because you got to think, Elijah, in and of himself, is standing amongst people that want to kill him. Okay? At any point in time during this ritual, Ahab probably could have told somebody to kill Elijah, but he didn't. So Elijah really stuck his neck out in this situation. And just like we read in just the verse before, he was just doing what God told him to do. That was all it was. That was all Elijah was doing, is what God told him to do. And his primary concern was just to show the people who the real God is. And that's all he was concerned about. And then verses 38 and 39, we'll wrap this up. 38 says, I already read those. 38 and 39, just read them. It says, there was more than just a bolt of lightning. It was a supernatural fire emitted from God himself. And I often thought that this consuming fire might even be the same type of fire that those might see in hell and the lake of fire as well. I've often thought about that several times that God has brought down fire in the Bible. I thought that, and I think that it's the same fire that we're going to see, we won't see it, but that he's going to use in hell. It's the same power there. So Elijah had to repair the altar of the Lord to be able to perform the job that God had him to do. So now, are there other altars in our life that need repaired? And that's really what these studies are looking at, even though we're looking at these wonderful stories. We're really trying to repair our spiritual life. Now, does anybody, can you say that we might have fallen like the children of Israel and slipped away from God a little bit? Got into a little bit of idolatry? You know, you think of our daily schedule, you know, our finances, our jobs, other relationships, you know, other things that we would rather do versus serving God. And in and of themselves, those things aren't bad things. But when we put those first and put preeminence to them because, you know, we have our routine, we have our schedule, we have the things that we have to do each day, and we don't give the preeminence to God first, that makes those things idolatry. And it's real easy to get caught in a rut, and it's real easy to get the mindset that these things are important. And I'm not saying your job's not important. I mean, God gave you that work, and we need the finances to make it. But we need God more. Who gave you that job? Who gives you those finances? Things like that. So basically what Elijah's showing us when he's up there at Mount Carmel, that we need to reorganize our priorities, and we need to get back to God. And it is a fundamental thing that will help change our direction of our country. But it's going to start, just like we did a couple weeks ago with our revival, it's going to start with you and I. It's going to start in our own lives and in our own revivals. So any other thoughts? Anything else anybody would like to add? No? All right, so we'll go ahead and have Ezekiel close us out in prayer. We'll go ahead and get ready for this morning service.